This is Net Video. I'm Jason Romney. We're in Sydney, Australia, where we're at the offices of Alcatel. And we're joined today by Jeff Hayden, who has the title Director Innovation and Market Development at Alcatel. He's about to change his role to a more Asia-Pacific focused role, but we've tracked him down here in Sydney and are very lucky to have his opinions about Australia's broadband future. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. It's nice to have you here at Alcatel.
We've been talking in a demonstration format just before this interview began about the remarkable Alcatel Microsoft solution that delivers a broadband-based television experience to the home, and which is sharply differentiated from services such as Foxtel's digital service by the fact that you've got all the broadband services running in parallel and accessible through the TV at once. What is unique and exciting about broadband TV?
Okay. The whole idea of IPTV is that it's delivered over an IP network. Now, that to begin with, it's important to explain that IP network is not the internet. It's not something that you can do on the web today, and it's not something that you'll be able to do on the web in the future. This is about building an IP network that has quality of service and can deliver multiple services at the same time. Things like video in all its forms, TV, video on demand, free-to-air, all those things can be delivered over an IP path, and even multiple TVs on separate paths, so they can all work perfectly without interacting with each other. But then you have to consider adding high-speed internet as well, and voice over IP as well, and multiples of those. So a typical home can have multiple TVs being used at the same time, multiple broadband internet connections being used at the same time, as well as multiple phone circuits. And then over time, how all of those things integrate together makes it a unique experience.
So that idea of a multi-service broadband network, does that mean that the big broadband service providers in Australia need to somehow carve out and dump the existing broadband network infrastructure and replace it with something entirely new?
Well, sadly, the answer to that question is it depends, because there's a lot of work that can be done to evolve the existing broadband networks in some cases. But the challenging thing is, if you want to deliver a lot of TV type services, you need a lot more bandwidth. So let me give you an idea of what sort of impact that has. Today, when you connect to the internet via broadband, and it really doesn't matter whether it's on a cable or DSL or even via satellite, and it really doesn't matter what access speed you've purchased, whether it was 256K or 1.5 meg or anywhere in between or even higher. The point is, once that access network has been connecting you to the internet, the back-end network that's connecting you has very high contention ratio. So you might get, and most telcos around the world offer services that connect you to the internet at, say, an average of 20 or 30 kilobits per second, even if you've got a very high-speed access. And that's okay when you're on the web, because you can surf and you download bits of content. You can, but what they won't do is guarantee that you can get end-to-end performance. The web just isn't like that. It's a shared thing. There's a high contention ratio. When you move to a video delivery, you need to have very high-speed connection end-to-end, nailed up for the whole time you're watching the TV circuit. So that requires you to have multiple megabits end-to-end, whereas today's broadband networks are all tens of kilobits end-to-end. That's what has to start to change. So it's an upgrade to the access to give you more bandwidth into your home, and an upgrade to the entire end-to-end network to give you enough bandwidth to deliver video services.
So at the moment, Australia is poised to have mass deployment of ADSL2+, which will provide much higher speeds. Is that the kind of new network we're talking about?
Well, that's a major upgrade to the access part of the network, and that's a requirement for this kind of service. Being able to deliver something of the order of 10 or 12 megabits per home is necessary to make this work. But that's just the beginning. You still have to have the back-end shared network, and that shared network has got to be upgraded to support enough bandwidth to deliver real-time services across it, and that's a major upgrade as well.
Is this kind of network upgrade something which the market will look after itself, or is this something that the government needs to take a lead in subsidising and setting up all kinds of artificial stimulants and incentives for industry to go ahead and implement this for such a small country like Australia?
That's a tricky question for Australia. Can I start by answering it a little more generally to begin with? and then we can get into the more gnarly issues of Australia. The idea that any telco or any cable operator for that matter who can deliver broadband services, they certainly could, and many are starting to deploy this kind of network, but they're really going to target their high-value customers and their high-value, high-density community areas where there is a valid return on that investment. What's much more challenging is looking at delivering it to the entire community, because in any country there are higher density, higher value customers and lower density, lower value customers, and in the markets where we're deploying this kind of technology now, those telcos are typically targeting high value customers in higher density areas to give a good return on their investment. The rest of it's harder, and so that's where government can potentially play a role, where there is a need to kind of, and I don't want to just use the word subsidy because that's just one way of solving that problem, but it's probably appropriate to say that a telco won't find a business model that simply says they can deliver this service to everybody, and perhaps they never will find a model that delivers it to everybody. The challenge is, how do we get it to an appropriate high percentage of the population cost effectively, and that really is a challenge. In my view, you could probably deliver services in Australia to comfortably possibly half the population. The other half would be financially challenging to do, and how that is done remains to be seen, if indeed it ever is.
Once this bold new network is instated, there's the prospect of being able to deliver movies and games, all kinds of broadband-related content properties, to the television in the home. Now, when that happens, what sort of issues does the home user have? Is this going to be an easy experience, or is it going to be baffling and stress engendering?
Yeah, well, if you were looking at the market today and you were looking at the product sets that are available to consumers today, you would have to say that only the bravest and technically savvy guys and girls will have a go at it. And that isn't the model that makes sense in the scalable solution. One of the things that will happen through this process of implementing an IPTV kind of solution is that the service provider who delivers that service will start to manage the service end-to-end into the home, which really does mean that it becomes a mass market kind of solution and not just a geek solution. And that's very important. That's fundamental to making this a success.
Today, if people want to simulate these kinds of capabilities, they can buy a Windows Media Center running on a Windows Media Center dedicated PC or an Elgato ITV on the Mac platform, and they can save movies, for example, to their hard disk and watch them later. They can also save broadcast television from the terrestrial transmitters and from Austar or Foxtel, that pay television services, in that way to their hard disk. But what we're talking about now is a situation, I think, where it's coming from the network, which is very much more live and bandwidth oriented, and an exclusive product of your relationship with Microsoft. Is that right?
Yes. In fact, what you've just described is the way anybody who is downloading movies today off the net is doing it. You know, they're simply connecting either with a Mac or a PC to the internet. They're getting the content through whatever sources they choose to. Much of it now is available to purchase. There are service providers around who sell the ability to download movies. This model we're describing now, the IPTV model, is just simply not like that. If you like, the traditional model of movie download is a non-real-time experience. It's using the web, it's using PCs, and that's a great model for many people who are on the net and using it. I mean, we all do those things. But
that's a kind of a trickle feed situation, isn't
which
it?
is absolutely not real time. You know, you're taking advantage of the fact that the internet can deliver you stuff in whatever speed that the internet can deliver it to you, and you certainly can't get it at a speed that would be able to then be watched real time while it was streaming in high quality, or even standard definition TV would be impossible over the net, and high definition would be, you know, completely out of the question. The model we're describing is one where all the content can be delivered to you real time. So the idea of changing channels and selecting from hundreds of TV channels, and the idea of having movies on demand that are just, you know, one remote control click away from ordering and watching, that requires a lot more bandwidth, a lot more sophistication in the networks, and the Microsoft TV application integrated across the sort of broadband networks that Alcatel build and integrate end to end provide that whole new experience. So it's a TV-oriented kind of experience rather than a PC-oriented experience. We're used to being non-real-time with a PC, or we're used to having small windows with video in that we can do off the net in a streaming sense. But this is much more about filling the screen with a full TV experience, and indeed high definition is available day one out of the solution with surround sound and with the normal home theatre experience. So it really is shifting an IP network from being just a web-connected IP network to a multi-service network environment that can deliver high-speed services to TVs.
Now, the interface that you demonstrate when you show people the Microsoft Alcatel solution looks similar to the Windows Media Center electronic program guide, but it's different in the sense that the Windows Media Center interface is being generated by that software running on a PC, whereas this is running on a digital set-top box connected to the cable or ADSL modem. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's a very good way of describing the difference. Even though they have somewhat similar looks and feels about them, I mean, it is Microsoft after all, they are indeed in Microsoft quite separate businesses and quite separate market opportunities. And I've no doubt, and perhaps you should talk to Microsoft about it, but as an observer and a partner of Microsoft, I would say that they are probably going to make those things look more and more alike over time, but they are distinctly different solutions. One is a web-connected, go buy a thing and run it on your PC model. The other one is an integrated end-to-end solution to deliver services to the TV, which you won't go and buy from Microsoft. You'll go and buy from the service provider, and it just will be powered by a Microsoft set of applications.
Is it the case that the Australian digital terrestrial broadcasters like 2, 7, 9, 10 and SBS, if they were retransmitted here, would have access to a rich interactive palette of services that they could wrap around their TV properties to generate new revenue streams, and that this would therefore be good for their business model, or would this actually be a menace to their business model?
Yeah, I think that the answer to that is a complex one, because there's really a couple of different ways of looking at this. Whoever the service provider is that deploys this kind of technology, they will have a desire to deliver as much rich content as they can, and they'll want to have as many broadcast channels available to their customers, as well as video on demand and other more integrated sort of triple play kind of services as well. So the existing digital broadcasters could absolutely be delivered over this platform completely unchanged in simply a retransmission form to deliver just standard free-to-air TV. And there are many people in Australia who can't get standard free-to-air TV in apartment buildings and places like that. That's a real challenge to deliver in many cases. And so this provides a vehicle potentially to get to many other people who can't get it. But then if you're suggesting that could then become a rich interactive experience, it absolutely could, but that would require quite a lot of collaboration between the service provider delivering the triple play services into the home and those broadcasters who are simply having their content re-delivered in a new form. There's no natural component for them to just build an interactive component of their channel. It's more an interactive component of the whole solution that could be brought into play. So there'd be a lot of commercial issues to resolve to work out the best way to make that an interactive experience, not just a technical solution. But certainly we're in the process now of integrating more a fixed and mobile experience together. Now the first steps of that are to make a mobile device have some control and interaction with this, because remember that 3G networks are just another IP network. They happen to be mobile. IP connectivity across those networks is just like IP connectivity in a fixed network. So getting information from an IP connected 3G device into an IP connected home entertainment environment is actually quite straightforward. So being able to remotely control things in this environment is quite straightforward. Being able to put messages on the TV screen is all straightforward. Even seeing the 3G phone with a nice screen as a client that can receive the programming as well is also foreseeable and part of a longer term plan. So there will be an ability to deliver the sorts of services into the home as well as to mobile devices over time. That isn't available yet, of course.
You have a demo of a personal digital assistant running a Microsoft operating system that lets people send messages to the television for their children to read, for example, like Go to Bed Now, and set the start and end times and the channel that will be recorded on the PVR.
Yep.
Is that kind of thing just the start?
That's a good question. We see it as the beginning, and in fact, the further out into the future we look, the harder it is to determine which particular device will be the thing that gives us a whole new kind of experience. Because what we're seeing here is the embryonic stages of what we at Alcatel describe as a user-centric broadband model, where the user buys devices and connects to networks without even being aware of the networks, and in some cases maybe even multiple networks, with complete lack of visibility from the user. It has to be that simple and that invisible to the user. And one of my favourite analogies on this is that, 100 years ago when people started installing water and electricity into the home, nobody was planning dishwashers or clothes washers. They became a valuable converged application of water and electricity combined with a new device to do something new and interesting 100 years later. I think what we're seeing here is, once we've got high-speed internet, once we've got ability to deliver TV, once we've got voice over IP being delivered all over a common infrastructure, then we'll see many, many devices that we've yet to dream up that can take elements of all of those things and make many more interesting applications and services. So I think this is just absolutely the beginning. And when we talk about triple play being voice, video and data, I think we're missing the point. Triple play is much more interesting when you look at, okay, voice, video and data provide an underlying capability, so now what do we do? And then it really gets fun.
NetVideo recently spoke to Martin Dalgleish over at PBL, where they're trying to take the 9MSN content and applications and span them across lots of platforms and devices in a seamless experience in the wonderful world of TCP/IP, and I'm hoping the answer to this will be yes. Does the fact that everyone's just using IP addresses mean that even though that might in some respects be a separate network to the one that, say, Telstra might set up, that people will be able to reach seamlessly and interoperably between one network and the other?
From a network perspective, the VLAN that's delivering the TV services is a completely contained thing, so you have to subscribe to that service to get access to it. But the point is, though, and your point is valid, when we're all in an IP environment and we all are identified uniquely and in a consistent way, then the ability to subscribe to these things becomes a lot easier and a lot more friendly for users. We are all seriously suffering today from having way too many passwords and usernames and having to remember which one, and the fact that they change for security reasons every month or every 3 months. Those things are all awful experiences for users, and they chase users away in many cases. Certainly when we're basing this all on common IP infrastructure, and there are security regimes put in place that are actually consistent for everybody, then we will see that improve. We will see a much more sophisticated identity management coming into play that makes it easier for users. And when I say sophisticated, it might be hard to implement, but the user has to see it as a very, very simple thing. So I think identity management's going to become a very, very important part of any service provider's model. I'd love to see the fact that the TV knows that it's me watching and not my kids, so that I can be presented with ads that are relevant to me and the kids can be presented with ads that are relevant to them, without us having to really be aware that the system is aware of us. That's what more personalised service means in the TV context, and that's once again just the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, I think this whole area of personalised service and identity management is a big one, and we'll see a lot more investment in that area. I'm not sure we'd like to see our first experience as a kid on a games machine create the one identity we live with for the rest of our lives, because many people choose quite bizarre names for themselves when they're young and trying to play a game. They might not want to use the same one when they go into the bank. In a properly user ID managed world, you probably can use the same tag for every experience, but with some nesting of access. When you're doing a banking transaction, there might be a level of security that's a bit different to logging onto a games machine or logging onto another kind of broadband connected service. there's a lot of work to be done in this area yet. It's a very fertile ground in the industry right now.
The Xbox 360 coming out and Halo being a cult classic and so on, it's games that are increasingly the engine room of innovation and consumer take-up. What sort of benefits does this kind of technology yield there?
It's a very simple model to implement games into this environment, because you are simply connected to IP networks. Now, whether those games are in what we'd call a walled garden or a gated garden environment, where the performance of them can be guaranteed and very high performance can be delivered in a quality-enabled network, or whether they're connected via the internet and in the way those games are today, both models can be supported in this environment very easily, because you've got everything being delivered over IP, you've got a reasonable amount of upstream bandwidth as well as downstream bandwidth. You've got high-quality interaction to either the TV or the PC, depending on the implementation. The games environment can be a very rich one, and it can be just to the TV if that's where people want it. Now, these things are not all implemented yet. I'm talking about capabilities here rather than available solutions. Games provide a key value add to the IPTV platform, and it's absolutely part of the plan to have it in that scene. But equally, the same broadband connection can be delivering games to the TV or the PC environment.
SBC in the United States has already ploughed forward with this. What kind of problems came up for them, or indeed policy considerations, that we're going to be able to learn from here?
SBC are building networks today, and thankfully Alcatel is the one building the network for them and integrating the Microsoft TV solution for them. That work is going on right now. They're planning to launch services towards the end of this year, and so many of the customer experiences are yet to be had. Obviously they've trialled and they've done things in a relatively contained manner. Real service launch happens towards the end of the year, and then we'll really get to see what kind of experiences the customers value and how their take-up rates go, how they win back customers from cable operators. I live and work in the Asia Pacific region, so I'm not terribly intimately involved in all the details in SBC, but I do know that they've had quite a long history now of losing customers to a very aggressive cable company who are offering triple play services, voice, video and data services on the cable. And SBC have been really suffering that pain of losing the battle in many cases with customers migrating over. This is SBC's way of stemming that flow and, in fact, hopefully offering something that's way more exciting to be able to win customers back again. And they've first of all had to suffer that pain to make this kind of bold step to try and win customers back again. We'll have to wait and see how successful that is.
The initial implementation of digital terrestrial broadcasting in Australia still used MPEG-2, as you would expect. But there are now a whole lot of additional video encoding formats, such as H.264 or Windows Media, for example. And your system, the Alcatel-Microsoft joint system, can support all three of those, can't it? MPEG-2, H.264, and Windows Media 9.
Yep.
Is the video format an important issue, or is that all just going to go away?
No, it actually is extraordinarily important, and increasingly so. First of all, MPEG-2 is a problematic for broadband, because the cost of delivering more and more bandwidth is not insignificant, and so however you can compress the video to be more efficiently delivered over broadband networks really does help in a business model. So the first implementation of the IPTV platform supports Windows Media 9, and very soon will follow H.264. They are much more highly compressed and much more modern video compression techniques than the now aging MPEG-2. The really valuable thing about H.264 and Windows Media 9 is that the content can be compressed to any level, quite suitable for delivering to mobile phones at, say, 100 kilobits. That's a valid thing, and the quality is still quite good at that level on a small screen. MPEG-2 doesn't scale down that way. If you ended up with MPEG-2 delivered to a mobile phone, you might end up with one or two blobs on the screen, and you would be able to tell if it was a person or a spaceship. It just wouldn't scale. So MPEG-4, which is H.264, and Windows Media 9 really do scale very well. They also enable some very clever tricks to be played to make fast channel changing possible. MPEG-2 doesn't permit that because it has standard reference frames that come along every couple of seconds, and you have to really synchronize to those to get channel changing to go at whatever speed that can support. There can be some really interesting tricks played to make channel zapping very fast with the modern video compression. And in fact, I should highlight that the IPTV platform from day one supports high definition and standard definition, and the user doesn't really experience anything different, except that if they're subscribing to an on-demand movie that's delivered in high definition with surround sound, they're likely to pay a bit more for that. That's what I like. I think that's a very cool piece of flexibility, that you can charge any piece of content for what it's worth. You don't have to just simply categorize something as a latest release, and whatever quality it is what it is. You can now have a high definition launch which can be charged potentially a little higher than a standard definition one with only stereo sound. So those sorts of flexibilities are really important for this sort of video compression.
Telstra and Bridge Networks here in Australia are conducting an H.264 based trial using the broadcast bandwidth, the DVB-H so-called standard. What is it about the kind of user experience that will be afforded by that trial to the Nokia 7710 handsets that will pick up the various video channels that are being transmitted as part of the trial that's different from what you're doing?
Well, that model is very much around delivering a broadcast content to mobile phone devices, and that's a very interesting and worthwhile project. This IPTV model we're talking about is really around home entertainment in the first instance, and will evolve into delivering to more devices. But that's a broadcast model. There isn't a lot of interactivity because DVB is a broadcast standard. That yes, you can have interactivity through the mobility component, like through the normal mobile phone uplinks and things. It's really quite a different focus. I mean, there's a huge amount of interest and value in delivering video services to mobile phones, particularly 3G and higher quality screens and things. But what we're really focusing on is how fixed services can be delivered into the home, at least for the immediate future.
Has Sol Trujillo, in his previous roles, had experience with or adopted already solutions in this area that you might reasonably extrapolate he would have a preference for here in Australia?
Well, remember that this stuff is all pretty new. I don't know Sol, but I know roughly when he was working in the US. At that time, there were a lot of trials going on with these sorts of technologies, very, very few deployments. Indeed, there still isn't too many deployments. His more recent experience in Europe potentially gives him more relevance to this sort of set of issues. I mean, he's done a lot of work in France, and France is a market which is developing very rapidly with video services from both competitive operators and telcos. And so my expectation is that he would have a pretty fair understanding of the success of those applications and services in France particularly, and in some of the surrounding markets as well. I mean, Italy's a very interesting video market already, with Fastweb and Telecom Italia going head to head with video solutions, and we're involved in various ways with both of those. I have to say that neither of them are part of this Microsoft Alcatel collaboration right now, but only because they've been around for quite a long time before we in fact formed this relationship. But it gives us a lot of experience in those markets. I'm sure the new CEO of Telstra will have similar experience from being intimately involved in the French market.
Is it conceivable that Foxtel might ultimately dump its existing infrastructure to replace it with this kind of solution?
That is a radical question. One has to think about that over a very long term. If you ask me that question in the context of 20 years from now, I would say, yeah, almost certainly. If you were suggesting that they might do that in the next 12 months, I'd say no chance. Where does that cutover point happen? Where does it become interesting? It's a very tough question to answer. But one thing I'd recommend we think about is, at what point does an HFC network actually need to be retired? These things don't last forever. They have a finite life. Money needs to be spent to keep them alive and maintained and refurbished. I don't know what the expected end date of that sort of network is, but when that end date eventually arrives, there's no way in the world that it will be rebuilt with the same technology. It almost certainly would be rebuilt with a fibre to the home kind of technology. And I think it's very interesting to bear in mind that even today's existing Foxtel services could run quite happily on today's available fibre to the home technology alongside all of the services that we've been talking about today. So you could deliver Foxtel services on a piece of fibre at the same time as running IP-based TV services, at the same time as running all the necessary high-speed services for internet and all the voice services all on the same fibre. So if I was putting my what do I think is important for Australia hat on, I would say that in 20 or 30 years' time there'll be an individual fibre running to many homes in the country, and that fibre will be being used to deliver every conceivable service into the home, other than those that are being delivered on wireless solutions, and there'll be some of those as well. Tricky question, because over time we ought not to have more than one network. There's no practical reason why we can't have one network. What there is political will or competitive pressures or regulatory frameworks that make having one network potentially quite difficult to implement. But that should be the objective of the country, I think, to have one only network that can do everything.
Just to clarify, is it the case that Foxtel Digital is digital in the sense that it's not analog, but it's not digital in the sense that it's a TCP/IP based digital?
Exactly. IPTV is around delivering digital, modern video compressed digital TV over an IP network. Foxtel is delivering MPEG-2 digital broadcast, and with their IQ capability they've added a little bit of interactivity, but it's very, very limited, and it's a nice PVR function, it has some really cool things, but it has limited interactivity. It has a reverse channel, it's a dial-up modem, for example, that really does provide some limitations. But it's still absolutely digital. And in fact, all the free-to-air broadcasters are broadcasting in digital in the same way as Foxtel is today. One's on a coax, one's in the atmosphere, but they're both the same MPEG-2 compressed digital video signals. This IPTV model we're talking about is using more modern video compression techniques, which provide more flexibility and better compression. But they're being delivered on IP networks, so they have an intrinsically more interactive potential.
Jeff, you mentioned before that one of the interesting implications of adopting this kind of platform is that advertisers will be able to know who is watching what ad. Does that mean that the network is watching you?
Well, the intrinsic to an IPTV type of application is the ability to, first of all, you've got to be able to manage all the content. So you've got to know what people have asked to view so that you can deliver it to them. Because this is pretty different to a conventional broadcasting model where every channel is delivered all the way into the home and you simply pick the one you want to watch. In this case, they're all being delivered out of a head end, and you're communicating with that head end to ask for the particular one you want to watch to be delivered, which is extraordinary when you think about how much quicker the channel changing is when all that signalling is going on across the network end to end to actually turn off the one you're watching, turn on the one you want to watch, and then deliver it to you. And to recognise that whole complex process happens much faster than a normal remote on a cable set-top, which in fact is just simply telling the set-top, give me this one instead of give me that one. So there's a lot of sophistication in that sort of service, but ultimately the system has to know which thing each TV is having delivered at the moment. That provides lots of information to people who then want to offer you more personalised services.
So Australian content creators and technology entrepreneurs must be banging their head against the wall out there thinking, with all these changes and miraculous new technologies, there must be opportunities for us to come up with new products and make money. We just can't quite work out what they are right now. Are there any hints you could provide?
Well, the first step is in fact getting a multi-service network built, and there aren't too many players out there who are actually seriously likely to do that. But once there is a multi-service network, then there ought to be plenty of opportunity for those sorts of players to get access to that multi-service network through the wholesaling models that exist today. There are plenty of, just to use Telstra as an example for a moment, they offer a wide range of wholesale services today. If they had a multi-service network like is required to deliver these services, that network could be able to wholesale a whole raft of other services as well. And you could well and truly imagine a situation where any content owner could buy wholesale capacity in a network to deliver their service in a broadband way to anybody who wanted to subscribe to that service. It's actually a richer wholesale model for content owners who don't want to build their own network. And I'm quite hopeful, as an Australian wanting to live in Australia and have great services here, that we in fact have a good model that ultimately means we've got one very cool network that can have good wholesale capability, and then people who have really interesting content can be out there competing without having to have their own network to compete on. It would be much more interesting to see it all on one common infrastructure, and the competition exist at the content and application layer rather than at the infrastructure layer.
Can we just let it all go and wait for the technology to be implemented and then attend to it?
Yeah, I don't think we can just wait and see what happens. I think, and in fact, SBC has had some interesting regulatory issues to deal with, and all the other carriers in the US, of course, have to deal with the same regulatory issues. They were very excited about deploying this kind of network and got very involved in building business models and deciding what they'd like to do. But ultimately, they didn't make a commitment to build this sort of network until the regulator actually gave them some favourable outcomes. For example, a good many of their customers are going to be connected with fibre to the home on this new network, and most of the rest of them will be connected on fibre to the curb technologies with ADSL2 Plus and VDSL as technologies to run the last bit of copper to the home at high speed. The regulator in the US said and made a ruling that said that if you deploy fibre in this situation, you don't have to share it at the physical infrastructure layer, and it was only that decision that made this business model make sense. Because if they had to put that fibre out there and then had to open it up for competition, then they simply couldn't have made a business model work. So they got that regulatory relief. They went forward with building a network. Right at the moment, in the US and in many markets, the copper loop is unbundled. So the telco is forced to share that copper loop with anybody who wants to use it. I'm not saying that's not a good idea, but if you have that same regime for fibre, nobody could afford to build a fibre network. So we have to think of a way of encouraging the construction of these new networks, and then have a way of sharing them in a cost-effective way. And I think that the model is likely to be one infrastructure and a good wholesale regime to sell higher value services in a wholesale sense. There's potentially many possible answers for that one.
Well, Jeff Hayden from Alcatel, you've raised many useful issues for the Australian broadband industry and indeed its regulators to think about. Thank you very much for coming on Net Video today.
It's a pleasure, Jason. Thank you very much.